Krixvor was a historian. He had spent 300 years studying the species of the galaxy. He had written about the peaceful Melodians, who communicated through song. He had documented the silicates, beings made of living crystal. He had even traveled to the dark nebula to record the traditions of the shadow-dwelling Umbrathi. But nothing had prepared him for humans. He sat in the great archive of Centauri Prime, surrounded by floating data screens. Each screen showed a different incident. Each incident was more impossible than the last. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he tried to make sense of what he was reading. "This cannot be correct," he muttered to himself. His assistant, a young Melodian named Trill, looked up from her own work. "What troubles you, historian Krixvor?" she asked, her voice creating small musical notes in the air. "These records," Krixvor said, "the records about humans and their weapons, they make no logical sense." Trill floated over to his station. Her translucent body shifted colors as she read the screens. "Ah, the human weapon files. I have heard stories about these." "Stories?" Krixvor leaned back in his chair. "What stories?" "My teacher once told me that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy," Trill said. "Not because they are strong, not because they are fast, but because they can turn anything into a weapon." Krixvor shook his head. "That is an exaggeration. Every species uses tools and weapons. The Krathani have their plasma spears. The Vortians have their mind blades. Weapons require technology and resources." "Perhaps you should read more of the records," Trill suggested gently. Krixvor turned back to his screens. He selected the first incident report, dated 50 standard years ago. It was from a Krathani military commander named General Thax. The report began simply enough. A Krathani patrol ship had captured a human transport vessel. The humans on board were traders, carrying simple goods between colonies. They had no weapons. The Krathani had searched them thoroughly. They had taken everything that could possibly be dangerous. Then they had locked the 12 humans in a holding cell. The humans were cooperative at first, General Thax's report stated. They did not resist capture. They did not fight back. We believed they had accepted their situation. Krixvor read on. The Krathani had planned to sell the humans as slaves on the black market. This was illegal, but the outer systems had few laws and fewer enforcers. The Krathani expected no trouble. They were wrong. On the 3rd night, the humans escaped. They did not just escape. They took over the entire ship. 12 unarmed humans had defeated a crew of 40 armed Krathani soldiers. "Impossible," Krixvor said out loud. "How?" He found the answer in General Thax's detailed account. The humans had used their food trays. The trays were made of thin metal. The humans had bent them, broken them, and sharpened them against the floor. They had made knives. But that was just the beginning. They had taken the cloth from their sleeping mats and twisted it into ropes. They had removed the light fixture from the ceiling and turned it into a club. One human had even pulled out his own tooth filling, made of a hard ceramic material, and used it to pick the lock on the cell door. Once they were free, they moved through the ship like ghosts. They used the ropes to strangle guards. They used the knives to cut power lines. They used the club to knock out anyone who stood in their way. The most creative human was a female named Sarah Chen. She had found cleaning supplies in a storage closet. Within minutes, she had mixed them together to create a gas that made the Krathani unconscious. She had learned this, the report noted, from something called a high school chemistry class. General Thax had survived only because he had locked himself in the command center. He had watched on the security cameras as his entire crew was defeated by people who had been given nothing but food trays and sleeping mats. Krixvor put down the report. His hands were shaking. "One incident," he told himself. This was one unusual incident. He selected another report. This one was from a prison colony on the ice world of Frostheim. The prison was run by the Vortians. known throughout the galaxy for their mental powers and their cruelty. They had captured a group of human soldiers during a border conflict. The Vortians were smart. They knew about the food tray incident. They gave their human prisoners nothing. The cells were bare metal. The humans ate nutrient paste directly from tubes in the wall. They slept on the cold floor. There were no fixtures, no cloth, no tools of any kind. The Vortian warden was confident. "Let them try to make weapons from nothing," he had said. The humans tried, and they succeeded. The report detailed how the humans had used their own bodies as weapons. They had exercised constantly, building their strength despite the poor food. They had practiced fighting techniques in their cells. They had developed signals, tapping on walls to communicate. But the truly remarkable part was what they did with the nutrient paste tubes. One human, a soldier named Marcus Webb, had discovered that the paste could be hardened if left to dry. He had slowly, over the course of weeks, collected tiny amounts of paste. He had shaped it. He had dried it against the cold walls. Eventually, he had created a small, sharp spike. Other humans had done the same. Some had used their dried paste to jam the locks. Others had created small tools to pry open ventilation grates. One human had even discovered that the paste, when mixed with his own saliva in certain amounts, created a mild acid that could weaken metal. The escape took 3 months to plan and 1 night to execute. 32 humans broke out of the most secure prison in Vortian space. They stole a ship and flew to freedom. The Vortian warden could not explain it. "We gave them nothing," he wrote in his report. "They made weapons from nothing, from paste and spit and determination." Krixvor felt cold despite the warm archive room. He looked at Trill. "How many of these reports are there?" he asked. Trill checked the database. Her colors shifted to a troubled purple. "Over 4,000 documented incidents," she said, "and those are just the official records. The unofficial estimates are much higher. 4,000 incidents of humans creating weapons from nothing. 4,000 times that logic and reason had failed against human creativity." Krixvor was beginning to understand why his teacher had warned him about this research. "Perhaps," Trill said softly, "we should call it a night. You look disturbed." "I am disturbed," Krixvor admitted, "but I must continue. The galaxy needs to understand this species. We need to know what makes them so dangerous." He selected another report. This one was titled The Banquet Incident. It was from a diplomatic mission that had gone very wrong. As he began to read, Krixvor realized that he had only scratched the surface. The humans were far more creative and far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. The banquet incident had occurred 20 years ago on the pleasure station Celestia's Dream. The station was neutral territory, owned by the Wealthy Merchants Guild. It was a place for trade, diplomacy, and entertainment. Weapons were strictly forbidden. Sophisticated scanners at every entrance detected any form of weapon or weapon component. Ambassador James Wright had been sent to negotiate a trade agreement with the Melodians. It should have been a simple mission. The Melodians were peaceful. The negotiations were routine. Nothing was expected to go wrong. But the Krathani had other plans. A group of Krathani extremists had infiltrated the station. They wanted revenge for their defeat in the border wars. They planned to assassinate Ambassador Wright and blame the Melodians, starting a new conflict between the two peaceful species. The attack came during a formal dinner. The Krathani extremists had hidden in the kitchen staff. They had no weapons either, thanks to the scanners. They planned to use their natural strength and claws to tear apart the human and his guards. What happened next became legend throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Wright was sitting at the head table when the attack began. 6 Krathani rushed into the banquet hall, roaring their war cries. The Melodian guests screamed and fled. The ambassador's 3 guards moved to protect him. The guards had no weapons, they had no armor. They were wearing formal diplomatic dress, but they were human. Guard Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the same woman from the transport ship incident years earlier, was the first to act. She grabbed a serving fork from the table and threw it with perfect accuracy. It struck the lead Krathani in the eye. The alien screamed and fell. Guard Sergeant Marcus Webb, also a veteran of human captivity, picked up a heavy crystal wine decanter. He swung it like a club, shattering it against a Krathani skull. The alien dropped instantly. Guard Private Tom Hayes was the youngest. He had no experience with combat improvisation, but he had grown up on Earth and he had watched the older humans train. He grabbed the tablecloth, stepped aside from a charging Krathani, and wrapped the cloth around the alien's legs. The Krathani tripped and fell hard on the marble floor. 3 Krathani down in less than 10 seconds, 3 more to go. Ambassador Wright was not a soldier, he was a diplomat. He had spent his life talking, not fighting, but he was still human. When a Krathani came for him, he did not run. He did not scream. He picked up his dinner plate. The plate was made of fine ceramic, decorated with gold trim. It was meant to hold delicate appetizers. Ambassador Wright held it like a disc and threw it hard at the charging Krathani. The plate shattered against the alien's face, blinding him with ceramic shards. Then the ambassador grabbed a chair. The chair was made of polished wood and metal. It was designed for comfort and elegance. Ambassador Wright swung it with both hands, striking the blinded Krathani across the head. The alien went down and did not get up. The last 2 Krathani stopped their charge. They looked at each other, then at the humans. 4 of their companions were down. The humans were armed with broken plates, wine bottles, and furniture. The Krathani had only their claws. They ran. The security report from Celestia's dream was detailed and thorough. It listed every item the humans had used as a weapon during the 30-second battle. Fork thrown as projectile, 1 injury. Wine decanter used as club, 1 knockout. Tablecloth used as tripwire, 1 capture. Ceramic plate used as throwing disc, 1 injury. Wooden chair used as club, 1 knockout. Table knife held defensively, no injuries. Bread roll thrown as distraction, no injuries. Hot soup thrown in face, 1 injury. Salt shaker thrown at eyes, 1 injury. Napkin twisted and used as garrote, no injuries, threat only. The report noted that the humans had also identified 17 other potential weapons in the room that they did not need to use. These included candelabras, serving trays, ice sculptures, curtain rods, potted plants, and the ambassador's own leather belt. A formal dinner, the security chief had written. We created a formal dinner. They saw an armory. Krixvor read the report 3 times. He still could not believe it. A dinner fork had become a throwing knife. A tablecloth had become a trap. A bread roll had become a distraction. They think differently, he said to Trill. They see the world differently. Where we see objects, they see weapons. Trill nodded, her colors thoughtful blue. My teacher said it is because of their planet. Earth is a dangerous world. They evolved surrounded by predators. They had to fight every day to survive. But other species evolved on dangerous worlds, Krixvor argued. The Krathani come from a death world. They are strong and aggressive, but they did not develop this creativity. The Krathani developed strength, Trill agreed. The humans developed thought. They learned to use their environment instead of just surviving it. Krixvor considered this. It made a certain kind of sense. The humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest. They did not have claws or fangs or venom, but they had minds that could turn anything into an advantage. He selected another report. This one was more recent, from just 5 years ago. It was titled The Mining Colony Uprising. The mining colony was on asteroid KX-447, deep in the outer reaches of civilized space. The colony was owned by a corporation called Stellar Mining Inc. The workers were mostly human, brought in as cheap labor. The conditions were harsh. The pay was poor. The safety standards were non-existent. When the workers tried to organize and demand better treatment, the corporation responded with force. They brought in a private security force of 200 heavily armed soldiers. They locked down the colony. They announced that the workers would now be considered prisoners, working without pay until the corporation decided otherwise. There were 800 workers in the colony. They had no weapons. The security force had plasma rifles, shock batons, and armored suits. The outcome should have been obvious. It was not the outcome anyone expected. The workers did not surrender. They did not accept their fate. They were human. The first thing they did was disappear into the mines. The asteroid was riddled with tunnels, some of them decades old. The security forces could not find them. Every time they sent a patrol into the tunnels, the patrol did not come back. The workers had turned the mines into a death trap. They used mining lasers, heavy equipment meant for cutting rock, as weapons. They used explosive charges, meant for breaking up ore, as bombs. They used the mine carts, meant for hauling materials, as battering rams. But their creativity went far beyond the obvious. They discovered that the dust in the mines was highly flammable. They created firebombs using dust, water, and simple chemical accelerants found in the refinery. They found that the support beams in the older tunnels were weak. They collapsed tunnels on top of security patrols. They learned that the chemical coolant used in the drilling equipment, when released as a gas, caused temporary blindness. They created gas traps throughout the mine system. One worker, an engineer named David Okonkwo, became famous for his inventions. He created a device using spare parts from broken machinery that generated a powerful electromagnetic pulse. The pulse disabled the security forces' weapons and communications. He built it using nothing but materials found in the maintenance shed. Another worker, a geologist named Maria Santos, discovered that certain rocks in the asteroid contained metals that were mildly radioactive. She had the workers collect these rocks and place them near the security barracks. The radiation was not enough to kill, but it was enough to make the guards sick and weak over time. The uprising lasted 3 weeks. By the end, the 200 security soldiers had been reduced to 47. The rest had been killed, captured, or had simply fled. The workers took control of the colony and sent a message to the galactic authorities. When the authorities arrived, they found the security forces locked in the same prison cells they had built for the workers. The workers were running the colony efficiently. They had weapons made from mining equipment, explosives made from refinery chemicals, and a communications array built from salvaged parts. The corporation tried to press charges against the workers for destruction of property and assault. The Galactic Court threw out the case. The judge noted that the workers had used nothing that was not already in the colony. They had simply repurposed things. The humans did not bring weapons, the judge had written in her decision. They made them, from rocks and dust and broken machinery. They turned a mine into a fortress and a prison into a revolution. This court cannot punish creativity. Krixvor finished reading the report. His mind was reeling. He had now read hundreds of incidents and the pattern was clear. Humans could make weapons from anything, absolutely anything. They had used food as weapons, furniture as weapons, clothing as weapons. They had used the environment itself as a weapon, collapsing tunnels and starting fires and creating toxic gases. They had even used information as a weapon, hacking communication systems and spreading propaganda. There was no situation too desperate, no resources too limited. Give a human a rock and they would find a way to kill you with it. Take away the rock and they would use the dirt. Take away the dirt and they would use their bare hands. I need to understand, Krixvor said. I need to talk to a human. I need to see how they think. Trill looked alarmed. Is that wise, after everything you have read? It is necessary, Krixvor insisted. I cannot write a complete history without primary sources. I must interview a human. Trill was silent for a moment. Then she said, there is a human living on this station, a retired soldier named Colonel James Wright. Krixvor blinked. The ambassador from the banquet incident. The same. He retired from diplomatic service 10 years ago. He now lives quietly on Centauri Prime, consulting for the Security Council. Krixvor felt a mix of fear and excitement. He was about to meet one of the most famous humans in the galaxy, a man who had fought off assassins with a dinner plate, a man who embodied everything that made humans so terrifying. Arrange a meeting, he said. I have questions. Trill nodded and floated away to make the arrangements. Krixvor turned back to his screens. He had more reports to read, more impossible stories to absorb. He selected the next file. It was titled The Prison Ship Revolt. As he began to read, he realized that he had still only seen a fraction of human creativity. The story was about to get much stranger. Colonel James Wright was not what Krixvor expected. The historian had imagined a large, intimidating figure, scarred from battle and radiating danger. Instead, he found a small, thin man with gray hair and kind eyes. Wright was 73 years old, and he looked like someone's grandfather. Thank you for meeting with me, Colonel, Krixvor said as they sat in Wright's modest apartment. The room was decorated with plants and books. It looked nothing like a warrior's home. Please call me James, the human said. His smile was warm. And I'm happy to help. It's not often I get to talk about the old days. Krixvor activated his recording device. I am researching human military history, specifically your species' ability to create weapons from unconventional materials. Wright laughed. It was a gentle sound, not threatening at all. Ah, the improvised weapons thing. That's what makes the aliens nervous, isn't it? It is, concerning to many species, Krixvor admitted. We do not understand how you do it, how you can look at a dinner plate and see a weapon. Wright leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. You know, I've been asked that question 100 times. By generals, by scientists, by diplomats. I've never been able to give a satisfying answer. Please try, Krixvor said. I need to understand. Wright nodded. All right, let me tell you a story, not from my career but from my childhood. Krixvor listened carefully. I grew up in a small town on Earth, Wright began. We didn't have much money. My father worked in a factory. My mother stayed home with us kids. We couldn't afford toys or games. That is sad, Krixvor said. No, it wasn't, Wright replied. Because we made our own toys. We made swords from sticks. We made balls from bunched-up socks. We made forts from cardboard boxes and blankets. We could play for hours with nothing but what we found in the house. Krixvor considered this. You learned creativity from poverty. We learned creativity from necessity, Wright corrected. And not just poor kids like me. All human children do this. Give a child a box and they'll make it into a spaceship, a castle, a car, a submarine. It's how we play. It's how we learn. But that is play, Krixvor said, not combat. Wright smiled. It's the same skill. When you grow up turning sticks into swords, you don't forget. When someone attacks you and all you have is a dinner plate, your brain says, this is heavy, this is hard, this can be thrown. And suddenly it's not a plate anymore. Krixvor wrote notes on his data pad. So this ability is learned in childhood. It's learned and reinforced, Wright said. Our history is full of stories about people using whatever they had to survive. David and Goliath, Robinson Crusoe. Every human knows stories like these. We grow up believing that the right tool is whatever tool you have. But other species also face hardship, Krixvor argued. Other species also learn to be creative. None of them show this same pattern. Wright leaned forward. His kind eyes became sharp for a moment. Let me ask you something, historian. When you were young, did you ever play fight with your siblings or friends? Krixvor thought about it. No, among my species, physical conflict is taboo. We are taught to resolve disputes through discussion. There's your answer, Wright said. Human children fight, we wrestle, we throw things at each other. We play games where we hunt and chase and capture. By the time we're adults, we've spent years learning how our bodies work, how objects move, how force can be applied. We don't think about it, it's instinct. Krixvor felt a chill. You are trained as warriors from birth. We're trained to survive from birth, Wright corrected. Fighting is just one kind of survival. They sat in silence for a moment. Krixvor absorbed what he had heard. It made sense, in a terrible way. Humans were not naturally more intelligent than other species. They were not naturally more violent. But their culture, their childhood, their entire way of life prepared them for conflict in ways that other species could not match. May I ask about specific incidents? Krixvor said finally. Of course. The banquet incident. You defeated trained assassins with a dinner plate. Can you tell me what was going through your mind? Wright closed his eyes, remembering. Honestly, not much. When the attack started, I didn't have time to think. I saw the Krathani coming. I saw the plate. My hand moved before my brain could catch up. But how did you know the plate would be effective? Wright opened his eyes. I didn't know, I hoped. That's the thing about improvised weapons. You never know for sure if they'll work, but you try anyway because trying is better than dying. Krixvor nodded. I have read about the mining colony uprising. The workers there created explosives, electromagnetic devices, even biological weapons. That seems beyond simple instinct. That's where human cooperation comes in, Wright said. One person can grab a plate and throw it, but put 100 humans together and they'll pool their knowledge. An engineer knows about electronics. A chemist knows about reactions. A doctor knows about biology. Together, they can create things that no individual could make alone. So humans are more dangerous in groups. Wright smiled again. Humans are always more dangerous in groups. Alone, we're clever. Together, we're terrifying. Krixvor made more notes. He had been researching for weeks, but this conversation was teaching him more than all the reports combined. He was beginning to see humans not as monsters, but as a product of their environment and culture. It was still frightening, but it was understandable. One more question, he said. Do you ever feel guilty for the Krathani you hurt, the guards you defeated? Wright was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I feel guilty for many things, for the wars I fought, for the orders I gave, for the people who died because I wasn't good enough or fast enough or smart enough. He paused. But do I feel guilty for surviving, for protecting the people I was responsible for? No, I did what I had to do. Even when it meant violence. Violence is always sad, Wright said. Even when it's necessary, even when there's no other choice. But humans learned a long time ago that the world doesn't care about what's fair or what's right. The world only cares about what survives. Krixvor ended the recording. He had enough to think about for days. He thanked Wright and prepared to leave. One more thing, Wright said as Krixvor reached the door. Yes. You asked me how humans can turn anything into a weapon. Wright smiled, and for just a moment, Krixvor saw something dangerous behind those kind eyes. The truth is, we don't turn things into weapons. Everything already is a weapon. We just see what's already there. Krixvor left the apartment with that thought echoing in his mind. Everything is a weapon. To human eyes, the entire universe was an armory waiting to be used. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. He returned to the archive with his notes. Trill was waiting for him, curious about the interview. What did you learn? She asked. I learned that humans are exactly as dangerous as the reports suggest, Krixvor said. But I also learned why, and understanding why is the first step to living alongside them. Can we live alongside them? safely? Krixvor considered the question. He thought about Colonel Wright, the kind old man who had killed assassins with a dinner plate. He thought about the miners who had built bombs from dust and machinery. He thought about every impossible story he had read. "Yes," he said finally, "as long as we remember what they are capable of, and as long as we never, ever give them a reason to use those capabilities against us." Trill's colors shifted to worried yellow. "That seems like a fragile piece." "All peace is fragile," Krixvor said. "That is why we study history, so we can learn from the mistakes of others." He sat down at his station and began to write. His history of human improvised weapons would take months to complete, but it was important work. The galaxy needed to understand this species, not to fear them but to respect them. And perhaps to learn from them. Because the universe was a dangerous place. And maybe, Krixvor thought, all species could benefit from learning to see weapons in dinner plates and hope in impossible situations. He began with the words that would define his work. Galactic records show that humans create weapons from literally anything available. This is not an exaggeration. This is not a myth. This is documented fact. 3 months after his interview with Colonel Wright, Krixvor found himself in a situation he had never imagined possible. He was no longer just a historian studying human weapons. He was now a witness to human creativity in action. It began with a routine research trip. Krixvor had traveled to the outer colonies to interview survivors of various human conflicts. He was aboard a passenger vessel called the Stellar Wind, a mid-sized transport carrying about 200 beings of various species. The trip should have taken 5 days. On the 3rd day, pirates attacked. The pirates were Krathani raiders, desperate criminals who preyed on ships in the outer reaches. They disabled the Stellar Wind's engines with electromagnetic weapons and forced their way aboard. There were about 30 of them, heavily armed with plasma rifles and shock blades. The passengers were gathered in the main hall. Most of them were merchants, tourists, and workers. They were not fighters. They huddled together, terrified, as the Krathani captain strutted before them. "You will all remain calm," the captain announced. His voice was harsh and threatening. "We are taking your valuables and your cargo. Anyone who resists will be killed. Anyone who runs will be killed. Anyone who looks at me wrong will be killed." Krixvor pressed himself against the wall, his 4 eyes fixed on the pirates. He had read hundreds of reports about situations like this. He knew how they usually ended. The pirates would take what they wanted and leave if the passengers were lucky. If they were not lucky, there would be hostages, ransoms, or worse. Then he noticed the humans. There were 12 humans on the ship. He had seen them during the journey, a mix of travelers heading to various destinations. They were not soldiers or guards. They were ordinary people, a teacher, a doctor, a couple of engineers, a family with 2 children. But something changed in their eyes when the pirates appeared. Krixvor had interviewed Colonel Wright. He had read thousands of reports. He recognized that look. It was the look of humans assessing their environment, seeing weapons where others saw only objects. The human teacher, a woman named Linda Park, was the first to act. She was standing near a refreshment table. As the pirates marched past, she casually picked up a coffee pot. It was full of hot liquid, still steaming. One of the pirates noticed. "Put that down," he ordered, raising his rifle. Linda smiled sweetly. "Of course, I'm so sorry." She put down the pot. But she kept the lid. Krixvor watched, fascinated. The lid was a simple disc of metal and ceramic. It was not a weapon. It was a kitchen utensil. But he saw Linda's fingers testing its weight, its balance. On the other side of the room, the doctor, a man named Hassan El-Amin, was being searched by a pirate. The pirate took his data pad, his credit chips, even his medical bag. "Please be careful with that," Hassan said. "It contains important medications." The pirate laughed and threw the bag aside. Hassan said nothing. but his eyes followed the bag. Inside were medicines, chemicals, substances that could heal or harm depending on how they were used. The engineers, a married couple named Chen Wei and Chen Mei, stood near a wall panel. They were pretending to be scared. They were doing a good job of it, but Krixvor noticed that Chen Wei's hands were moving slightly, testing the bolts that held the panel in place. Behind that panel, Krixvor knew, were electrical conduits, power cables, the nervous system of the ship. The family with children was the most interesting. The parents, David and Sarah Okonkwo, Krixvor recognized the name from the mining colony reports, though this was a different family, had positioned themselves between their children and the pirates. They looked helpless, but they were communicating with tiny gestures, taps on each other's hands, a private language built over years of marriage. Their children, a boy of about 10 and a girl of about 8, were watching everything with bright, curious eyes. They were not crying. They were not panicking. They were observing just like their parents. The pirate captain was growing impatient. "Search them all," he ordered. "Take everything valuable, then we strip the cargo hold." The pirates spread out. This was their mistake. Later, when Krixvor wrote his report on the incident, he would note that the pirates violated the first rule of human containment. Never let humans scatter. Never give them time to plan. Never let them work in groups. It took about 15 minutes for the humans to get into position. 15 minutes of being searched, insulted, and threatened. 15 minutes of smiling and nodding and looking harmless. Then Linda Park threw the coffee pot lid. It flew across the room like a throwing disc, exactly like the one Colonel Wright had used at the banquet incident. It hit a pirate in the throat. He went down, choking. At the same moment, Hassan El Amin moved. He had gotten close to his medical bag during the searches. Now he grabbed a syringe filled with sedative and jabbed it into the nearest pirate's neck. The pirate collapsed instantly. Chen Wei ripped the wall panel open. The electrical cables behind it sparked and crackled. He grabbed a cable and pressed it against a pirate who had been standing guard. The shock sent the pirate flying. Chen Mei used the moment of confusion to grab a fire extinguisher from the wall. She swung it like a club, taking down another pirate. Then she pointed it at a group of 3 more and sprayed, blinding them with foam. David and Sarah Okonkwo moved together, perfectly coordinated. David tackled a pirate from behind. Sarah used the pirate's own shock blade against him. Their children threw whatever they could find, books, bags, even shoes, creating chaos and distraction. The other humans on the ship joined in. The remaining passengers, even the ones from other species, were inspired by the sudden resistance. A melodian used her voice to create a sonic attack that stunned 2 pirates. A silicate swung his crystalline arm like a hammer. It was over in less than 3 minutes. 30 pirates defeated by 12 humans and their improvised weapons. Coffee pot lids and medical syringes. Electrical cables and fire extinguishers. Books and shoes and determination. The pirate captain was the last one standing. He had barricaded himself in the corner of the room, his plasma rifle pointed at the crowd. "Stay back," he screamed. "I'll kill all of you." Linda Park walked toward him. She was carrying nothing. Her hands were empty, but she did not look helpless. "You have 1 weapon," she said calmly. "You can kill maybe one of us before we reach you, 2 if you're very good, but there are 12 of us, and we have already shown you what we can do with coffee pot lids and fire extinguishers." She smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Imagine what we can do with your rifle." The captain dropped his weapon. He surrendered completely. Later, when the authorities arrived, they found the pirates bound with strips of cloth torn from curtains. They found them guarded by passengers armed with kitchen utensils and maintenance tools. They found a ship that had been a trap, and a prison turned into a fortress and an armory. Krixvor gave his statement to the authorities. He described everything he had seen. The officer who took his statement, a Vortian, just shook his head. Another human improvised weapons incident, the officer said. We get one of these every few months. The reports are always the same. Impossible weapons, impossible tactics, impossible odds. It was not impossible, Crixvor said. It was inevitable. Put humans in danger, take away their weapons, and they will create new ones. It is what they do. It is who they are. The officer nodded. That's what makes them so useful as allies and so dangerous as enemies. Crixvor returned to his seat on the repaired Stellar Wind. His data pad was full of notes from his interviews and his experience. His mind was full of thoughts about humans and weapons and survival. Linda Park sat down next to him. She was drinking a cup of tea, looking perfectly calm. I read your work, she said. The preliminary reports on human improvised weapons. It's very good. Crixvor was surprised. You have access to my research. I'm a teacher. Research is what I do, she smiled. I wanted to thank you. Most species write about humans like we're monsters. You're trying to understand us. That's rare. Understanding is the beginning of peace, Crixvor said. I want other species to know that humans are not random violence. You are logical, predictable, even, if you know what to look for. Linda laughed. Predictable, that's a new one. What are we predictable about? You will always fight, Crixvor said. Always find a way, always refuse to surrender. That is predictable. Linda considered this. I suppose it is. We don't like losing, never have, probably never will. Is that your greatest strength, or your greatest weakness? Linda finished her tea. She looked at the cup in her hand, a simple ceramic vessel that could become a weapon if needed. Both, she said. It's always been both. Crixvor published his work 1 year later. The title was The Weapon Makers, a comprehensive study of human improvised combat. It became the most widely read historical work of the decade. The book changed how other species viewed humans. No longer were they seen as random, chaotic beings who fought without reason. They were understood as a species shaped by their history, their culture, and their relentless determination to survive. Some species were frightened by the book. They had always suspected that humans were dangerous, and now they had proof. They called for restrictions on human travel, human trade, human contact. Others were inspired. They saw in humans a model for their own development. If a species with no natural weapons could become the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, perhaps any species could reach such heights. Most species simply accepted the truth. Humans were part of the galaxy now. They could not be ignored or isolated. The best strategy was to understand them and work with them. Crixvor became famous. He was invited to speak at universities and councils throughout civilized space. He met leaders and generals and scientists who all wanted to understand his findings. But his favorite engagements were the small ones. He enjoyed visiting schools, talking to young beings of all species about the importance of understanding others. The humans taught me something important, he would tell the students. They taught me that strength comes in many forms, not just muscle or weapons or technology. Sometimes the strongest thing is the ability to look at a problem and see a solution that no one else can see. He showed them pictures from his research, images of dinner plates used as weapons, coffee pot lids and fire extinguishers and medical syringes, ordinary objects turned extraordinary by human creativity. Any of you could learn this skill, he told them. Not to fight necessarily, but to solve problems, to overcome obstacles, to refuse to accept that a situation is impossible. The students always had questions. The most common one was, are humans really that dangerous? Crixvor always gave the same answer. Yes and no. They are dangerous to those who threaten them, but they are also the most loyal allies in the galaxy. They will fight for their friends just as hard as they fight for themselves. One day, many years later, Crixvor received a message from Colonel James Wright. The old man was dying. He wanted to see the historian one last time. HFY traveled to Centauri Prime immediately. He found Wright in a hospital bed, surrounded by family and friends. The former soldier and diplomat was 91 years old. His body was failing, but his eyes were still sharp. "Historian," Wright said with a weak smile, "you came." "Of course I came." HFY sat beside the bed. "You changed my understanding of the universe. I could not let you leave it without saying goodbye." Wright laughed softly. "I'm just an old man who got in a few fights. You're the one who changed things. Your book helped more people understand humans than 100 diplomatic missions." "I only wrote what I observed," HFY said. "You and your people provided the material." They sat in silence for a while. Wright's family gave them space, understanding that this was an important moment. "I have one more question," HFY said finally. "A question I have thought about for years." "Ask it." "If humans can make weapons from anything, does that mean you can never be at peace? Will you always see the universe as a battlefield?" Wright was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've thought about that too for most of my life." He paused. "The answer is complicated." "Tell me." "Humans can make weapons from anything. That's true, but we can also make other things. Tools, art, music, medicine. The same creativity that lets us turn a plate into a weapon also lets us turn metal into sculptures and words into poems." He looked at HFY with tired but peaceful eyes. "We see potential everywhere. Sometimes that potential is for violence, but sometimes it's for beauty, for connection, for things that make life worth living." "Then why do the records only show the weapons? Why is that what the galaxy knows about humans?" Wright smiled. "Because those are the stories that get recorded. Nobody writes reports about humans creating beautiful gardens or composing symphonies. But we do those things too, every day. We create far more beauty than destruction." HFY considered this. It was true. His research had focused on conflict because that was what the records contained, but records were not complete pictures. "Perhaps my next book should be different," he said. "Perhaps I should write about human creativity in all its forms, not just the violent ones." "That would be nice," Wright said. "It would be nice to be remembered for more than our weapons." 2 days later, Colonel James Wright died peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was attended by hundreds of beings from dozens of species. Humans and Melodians and Silicates, and even a few Krathani, all gathered to honor a man who had fought for peace even when he had to fight with dinner plates. HFY spoke at the funeral. He talked about the human capacity for creativity. He talked about the danger and the beauty of a species that could turn anything into a weapon or a work of art. He talked about the lessons the galaxy could learn from humans. "They taught us to never give up," he said, "to see possibilities where others see only limits, to find hope in desperate situations and strength in ordinary things." He paused, looking at the crowd of mourners. "Colonel Wright once told me that everything is a weapon to human eyes. I think he was wrong. I think everything is potential to human eyes. Potential for good or bad, for creation or destruction. The choice is always theirs." He concluded with words that became famous throughout the galaxy. "Let us hope that, as humans become part of our community, they will choose creation more often than destruction. Let us hope they will use their gifts to build rather than break. And let us always remember that the species that can make weapons from anything can also make wonders from nothing." The funeral ended, the mourners dispersed. HFY returned to his work. He spent the next 10 years writing a new book. He called it The Creators: Human Innovation and Art Throughout History. It documented human achievements in science, art, music, architecture, and 100 other fields. It showed the same creativity that made humans dangerous also made them capable of extraordinary beauty. The book was even more successful than his first one. It helped other species see humans as more than just warriors. It helped humans see themselves as more than survivors. HFY lived to be 473 years old, a long life even for his species. He spent those centuries studying the galaxy and its inhabitants. He wrote dozens of books about different cultures and civilizations. But he always came back to humans. They remained the most fascinating species he had ever encountered. They continued to surprise him, even after centuries of study. They built amazing things and destroyed terrible ones. They fought wars and ended them. They made weapons from dinner plates and symphonies from silence. In his final years, HFY was asked to summarize everything he had learned about humans in a single sentence. He thought for a long time before answering. Humans, he said, are the species that refuses to accept impossible. Give them a problem and they will solve it. Give them nothing and they will make something. Give them weapons and they will make peace. Give them peace and they will make art. He smiled, his 4 eyes bright with the wisdom of centuries. And if you try to take any of these things from them, they will fight you with coffee pot lids and fire extinguishers until they get them back. The galactic records continue to this day. They still document human improvised weapons, an endless list of impossible objects turned into tools of combat. But now they also document human improvised creations, music and art and inventions that change the galaxy for the better. The humans keep making both. That is their nature. That is their gift. And the galaxy has learned to live with them, appreciating the beauty while respecting the danger, understanding that both come from the same source. A species that sees potential in everything and refuses, absolutely refuses, to accept that anything is impossible. That is the final lesson of the human weapon makers. It is not about violence. It is about will, the will to survive, the will to create, the will to be more than what the universe expects. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous weapon of all.